We had Chris Hipkins sort of beaming in, like some sort of weird reality TV experiment, wasn't it, from his isolation? That was awful timing, wasn't it, Guyan?
It was, and a deep irony given that it was really COVID that pushed them over the line in 2020 and gave them a majority government, and Chris Hipkins himself has been the minister responsible for a lot of those COVID restrictions, and then to see the virus put him out in one of the final weeks of the campaign was pretty tough, so he's got a lot of ground to make up as he goes into that last week.
Yeah, it must have come as just such a blow, mustn't it, Andrea, because there was a little bit of momentum, a spark, happening the week before, and then all of a sudden snuffed out.
There was, and to be fair, they have had a little bit of a poll bump, a very small one at the end of the week, so maybe they need to put him back into the hotel room. But look, to be honest, I didn't think National really capitalised that much on, Christopher Luxon was out and about on the campaign trail, but National haven't had a fabulous week.
Yes.
Christopher Luxon has really stepped up. He is a great campaigner. I was with him a couple of days this week and he's full of energy. But, he spent most of the week either talking about Winston or defending the holes in their tax plan.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that. But, Ruth, does it look like to you the blue wave is stalled?
Well, nowhere is anybody talking about the inconvenient truths, the maths. We have government spending up by 50%. Our debt has doubled. We are in real fiscal shtuck. Growth has tanked. And what this means is that inflation and interest rates are going to be higher for longer. That's the wrecking ball. That's what we should be talking about. Debt and deficits are bad enough, but denial is even worse.
Well, this week we have had the talk seem to focus at the end on National's tax policy, more questions around that. And is that the reason you think that National has stalled? That tax policy has just dogged them the whole way through this campaign, hasn't it?
Yes, it has, and National always like to promise tax cuts and then they've wound it back. They were going to cut at the top end as well. They've had to wound it back for the fiscal circumstances that they find, and there've been a lot of questions, and I think legitimate ones, on whether it stacks up, and on many areas it doesn't appear to, and nor does Labor's GST policy, frankly, and you saw that in the debate with Simon earlier. So I think they're both on fragile ground on two of their major planks, both Labor and National.
Frankly, I think both red and blue are guilty of heroic assumptions. I wrote fiscal rules for prudent management of public finances. Nowhere in those rules did it say heroic assumptions will get you there. We've got a campaign of hard truths, heroic assumptions, or sweet lies.
I think the public sense that, though. They sense what Ruth is saying. Maybe they don't understand the assumptions, but they understand that both parties are making wild promises. I think they sense that both sets of promises will be inflationary. And it comes down to, I guess, the pocketbook economics, that we're going to be paying higher mortgage interest rates for longer, and now the orthodoxy is that we're going to have to endure, unemployment going up, and people genuinely sense that both parties are looking to cut public services at the same time as promising sweeteners.
So why aren't we having this debate in the campaign? These are big issues. Our country is facing big issues. These are uncertain global economic times. It's just not credible for either party, is it, Guyan, to be out there sort of retail politicking in this economic environment?
Well, I think you're right. I think it's a bit like the cookie jar. The politicians just cannot resist putting their hand out and grabbing it. And going into an election campaign promising nothing, they can't really force themselves to do it, but it could have been quite smart to do so. John Key and Bill English, you made a virtue of running zero budgets for many years. It can be done, and Ruth Richardson will have some stuff to say about, fiscal austerity. But I think politicians do really struggle to go in a campaign without promising to deliver something to people.
Look, it's not called fiscal austerity, it's called financial prudence, and we're paying the price in interest rates and inflation for the departure from financial prudence. The stakes could not be higher. Fiddling won't cut it. Fundamental reform is required.
Well, neither party are promising fundamental reform between National and Labor. So where does that land them after the election, Andrea?
I think realistically we're going to have 3 years of just battening down the hatches. I think it's going to be probably quite brutal, although we're not now technically in a recession. I think it's going to feel like it is, and it's going to be whoever's in government. They're going to have to run very tight fiscal policy. There's not going to be a lot of fun. There's not going to be a lot of extravagant promises, and then after that, maybe after 3 years in the next election, it will be a more an election campaign maybe full of more vision for the future?
Look, the imperative is we need to grow the economy, not the government. I mean, growth, the IMF looked at us among 160 countries. We were 159. Growth has tanked. We need to get real about our priorities. Growth, they say, is the magic elixir. You don't get growth by magicking up. You get it by the fundamental reform in the policy settings that encourage effort and energy and enterprise in the private sector.
There must be some frustration on the right at the moment, Ruth. I know that you're on the board of the Taxpayers Union. Yes. They have been very vocal about, and critical actually, of the government. So this is not a typical election, isn't it? The right even seems sort of splintered.
No, I don't think they're splintered. I think, to look at your colour, that party...
A pure coincidence, I have to tell you.
That party is telling the hard truths.
You're a supporter of David Seymour?
Yes, I am. Red and blue are doing the heroic assumptions. And the other parties, there will always be other parties. MMP licences.
People are buying those truths.
No,
Actor, you know, their momentum has stalled. They're dropping. I mean, they dropped 5 points in the last poll.
But
people aren't buying. They aren't buying the growth story anymore because growth hasn't delivered for them.
There is no growth.
Yeah, but in the previous government, when there was growth, we ended up with a housing crisis and a whole litany of child poverty. People are not buying that message anymore. And that's why we're seeing such apathy in this election, because they don't believe the promises.
Which is why fundamental reform matters.
I want to bring in Guy
MMP,
here.
there'll always be a spoiler, and we know who that spoiler is.
We do, but before